afternoon. Thank you all for lasting this long and allowing me to come on stage. Here we go. Thank you. I'm Kathryn Nagle. It's an honor to be here today in front of you, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about restoring tribal sovereignty through art, advocacy, and law. I'm a lawyer and a playwright, which means I like to argue, and I sometimes can be quite dramatic. But I'm also a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and so here in the United States today, that means my existence is somewhat of a miracle. It means at some point along the line, if you're a tribal citizen today, somewhere along the line, your grandmother or your grandfather survived what was an almost complete eradication. Somewhere along the line, a US agent or a soldier or someone messed up and didn't quite finish the job. And so you're still here today. And what does that mean? For me, as a lawyer and a playwright, it means that I have to spend my life restoring the sovereignty that should never have been taken from my nation. Not to go too legal on you, but this is a law that Cherokee Nation passed in 1825, and I take particular pride in it because you see the Speaker of the Council at that time signed his name as Major Ridge. That is my great-great-great-grandfather. And in 1825, Cherokee Nation outlawed the rape of any woman on Cherokee Nation lands by any person, regardless of race or citizenship. What does that mean? It means that in the 1820s, we know Cherokee Nation, my nation, was exercising criminal jurisdiction over anyone who came onto Cherokee lands, and in this instance, committed a rape. And that's of extreme importance to our tribal nations today because our women face some of the highest rates of sexual assault, murder, and rape in the United States today. But we know the connection between safety for our women and tribal sovereignty. And this is a quote that actually comes from the Cheyenne, but it really epitomizes what many of our tribal nations believe. And that's that the nation shall be strong so long as the hearts of the women are not on the ground. Why did the US military attack our women at battles like the Sand Creek Massacre or on the Trail of Tears? Because the US military knew that the way you eradicate a nation is you take out its women. And we're still under conquest today. Here we go. So 180 years after my grandfathers worked within Cherokee Nation's council to pass a law outlawing the rape committed by any person on Cherokee lands, the United States Supreme Court in 1978, in a case called Oliphant, declared that tribal nations could no longer exercise criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. What does that mean? That means a non-Indian can come onto tribal lands today, rape, kill, murder, whatever crime you want, commit it, and the tribal government has no jurisdiction to prosecute you. And what the Supreme Court said in 1978 is that this rationale was based on, one, the idea that the effort by Indian tribal courts to exercise criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians is a relatively new phenomenon. Now, I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician, but 1825 to 1978, it's like 180 years or something. That doesn't seem new, but I may have missed that lesson in school. So the next quote comes from a case called Johnson v. McIntosh from 1823. And in 1978, the Supreme Court cited this 1823 decision saying, well, they can't exercise criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians because their rights to complete sovereignty as independent nations are necessarily diminished. Well, Johnson v. McIntosh is an 1823 case that basically says, if you look at the bottom quote, this is, I think, some of the worst language in the case, that Indian tribes could not claim legal title to their land because the tribes of Indians inhabiting this country were fierce savages whose occupation was war and whose subsistence was drawn chiefly from the forest. You can read the rest of the case, but one of my other favorite quotes is, "Conquest gives a title which the courts of the conqueror cannot deny." This case is still good law today. It has never been overturned by the Supreme Court. So we still live in a country where our highest court in American democracy today remains a court of the conqueror. And because of that legal framework that has never been changed or altered, our tribal nations still do not have the necessary jurisdiction that we had before. It was taken away from us. But today we don't have the jurisdiction to protect our citizens. My time just totally disappeared. Okay, it's coming back. Whew! I looked down and I saw 0. So this is Native women face the highest rates of sexual assault and domestic violence in the United States today. Recently, the United States Department of Justice put out a report saying that 4 out of 5 Native women will suffer rape, sexual assault, or some sort of violence in their lifetime. 80%, we know more than 80% of these crimes are committed by non-Indians against our people. So imagine that. Tribal nations cannot criminally prosecute 80% of the violent crimes committed against their citizens. We did have a partial victory in the Violence Against Women Act in 2013. When Congress reauthorized the act, they restored a portion of our tribe's criminal jurisdiction, but they only restored criminal jurisdiction over non-Indian acts of domestic violence and dating violence. So you can still go onto tribal lands and rape and murder and pillage, and unfortunately our tribal governments don't have jurisdiction according to the Supreme Court. This was a huge victory, and so the way art comes in addition to just being a lawyer, is that I did work with several survivors, and two of the women who you see here in this photo who were at the signing ceremony when Obama signed it into law, Diane Millich and Deborah Parker, using their stories and these women, we created a play called Sliver of a Full Moon. And it's gone around from Harvard Law School to Stanford Law School. We're taking it to Alaska next week, and it tells the story of why jurisdiction is so critical.
This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story.
The story of my sister.
My daughter.
The story of my mother.
And her mother.
And her mother's mother.
My grandmother.
My granddaughter. Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's it for now. But you can see that several of these women, when sometimes they can't make a certain show, and so I step in. I don't actually like to be in the show, but just they're all survivors themselves. And so Billie Joe Rich on the far right is from Eastern Band. She tells her own story on stage. Second from left is Lisa Bruner. She's White Earth Ojibwe. She tells her own story. And second from the right is Nettie Warbelow, Athabascan from Alaska. It is a revolutionary act to put Native women on stage sharing their own stories. Not only do these women face the highest rates of violence right now in the country, but we have no representation in mainstream media, on the news, or on the American stage. And the majority of Americans who see a depiction of a Native person on an American stage today see red face. They see a non-Native person either putting fake makeup on and fake feathers and pretending to be Native, or some other depiction that's not by us or for us or actually even about us. So to put a Native woman on stage is quite a revolution. Thank you. I also briefly want to talk about what's going on at Standing Rock. I actually just flew back this morning to here from the reservation, and it is quite a revolution. It's really exciting to see what's happening, but you have to understand it from the tribal nation's perspective. Standing Rock is fighting to protect its water, its sacred sites, its burial sites, and its women and its children. And I think the best way to sum it up is using the chairman's own words. He states, "History connects the dots of our identity, and our identity was all but obliterated. Our land was taken, our language was forbidden. Our stories, our history were almost forgotten. What land, language, and identity remains is derived from our cultural and historic sites. Sites of cultural and historic significance are important to us because they are a spiritual connection to our ancestors. Even if we do not have access to all such sites, their existence perpetuates the connection. When such a site is destroyed, the connection is lost." Let me tell you, in this litigation, after the tribe filed their lawsuit, one of the things the Dakota Access Pipeline said is, okay, you say there's sacred sites, you say people are buried, but you won't tell us where. And tribes have really good reasons for not sharing this information. As soon as the day they filed court documents saying this is exactly where the sacred sites are in the path of the pipeline, that next morning, the Dakota Access Pipeline Company moved its construction crew 20 miles to start constructing exactly on those sacred sites that the tribe had just identified. And when peaceful protesters showed up without any weapons to say, stop this construction, you're destroying the sacred sites, the company had a private security force that sent attack dogs that bit and attacked the peaceful protesters, including one pregnant woman who was bit. I mean, it's absurd what's happening, and you're not going to see it on the national media, but hopefully you can use, and this is cool because the youth started it, hashtags. Please, please, please support us on social media. The mainstream media does not cover our movements, so we really rely on social media. You can use hashtag Stand With Standing Rock, hashtag No Dapple, and hashtag Respect Our Water. I have like 16 seconds, okay. There's a reason she's called Mother Earth. This ties back into what I was talking about before. I love this quote from Vanessa Gray, "The land is our mother, so when we lose value for our land, people lose value for the women." So thank you so much, and that's it. Thanks. Thank you.
Woo. Wow, I have like goosebumps. I would like you to spend a little bit more time talking about sovereignty. And as I was watching backstage, the images and the presence of Native women in the context of an era where Native women are being disappeared really sat with me and struck me. And so I thought it would be really important for you to talk a little bit more about why sovereignty is important for your survival and for all of our survival.
Yeah, that's quite a question. Once I was asked to define sovereignty, and I kind of struggled with that, but I will go to Billy Frank, who's one of our important leaders, and he said, sovereignty is when I speak my language. Sovereignty is when I fish in the same river that my ancestors fished in. Sovereignty, and so I think for Native people, sovereignty is, it's a tribal nation, and it's citizenship in that tribal nation. So there's a government involved, but it's also sovereignty over our own bodies, sovereignty over our identity, and you see that where sovereignty comes in is that, specifically in relation to Native people in the history of the United States, that the goal of conquering land, hand in hand with that was eradicating tribal sovereignty. We're just now in 2016 starting to see the restoration of the tribal sovereignty that the United States took away. And that's coming through Congress and through acts of President Obama, honestly, has been the best president we've had in the history of the United States in terms of restoring tribal sovereignty. I'm very terrified about what might happen in January. But through all of that, the Supreme Court hasn't caught up. And so when you read these Supreme Court cases, you still read the justification for the destruction of sovereignty, which is based on the idea that citizens of tribal nations are racially inferior. And not only that, but if you read Johnson v. McIntosh, it says that we don't know how to farm and that we hunt. Okay, now, nowadays, hunting is like, a constitutional right under the Second Amendment, but apparently when American Indians do it, it makes you racially inferior. So, but I think, right? And in Johnson v. McIntosh from 1823, you see the beginnings of, okay, they're uncivilized because they live in balance with nature, because they hunt, because they don't think of land as something to conquer. They don't see it as something to capitalize on. So therefore, they're uncivilized, and we're legally justified to take it from them. So you fast forward to what is tribal sovereignty today and what's going on at Standing Rock, and you realize that you can't be an environmentalist unless you advocate for the restoration of tribal sovereignty. Because the reason our environment is degraded, the same thing that justifies destroying the environment for future generations is the same legal justification used to eradicate tribal nations. So that's my answer to that. Thank you. Thank you.